So I won't be able to see the chat, but if you have any questions or anything, pop them in there and we'll get to those at the end, and we'll have obviously some time for question and answer. So I first of all want to thank you all for being here and joining me today. I understand that it's a Sunday morning, but clearly you're all leaders in your own right, so it's great to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about redefining leadership from the inside out. And this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, obviously, and that is that once we understand ourselves better, then we're better able to relate to other people, and that is what makes us great leaders. So a little bit about myself. Some of you know me, some of you don't. My title is business therapist, better known as leadership consultant. And my backstory is that I was born as an only child, and coming into a family with only three, I became a mediator, not necessarily by choice. It just kind of happened. And I learned at a very young age that mediation and perspective reframing was the key to getting everybody on the same page. So once we're able to put something into somebody else's terms that resonates with them better, then everybody can relate and we can have more effective, more open and honest conversations. So that also ties into being a perspective reframer. And once we can do that, then we're able to better connect with one another. I've worked in many industries. Some of you have worked with me, some of you haven't, but predominantly advertising, hospitality, and events, where you have a whole mismatch of personalities. I've traveled to over 40 countries, so I really like to bring the cultural aspect of different cultures, different ways of being, different personality traits within these cultures, and nonverbal cues into my work. And I went to the University of Guelph and George Brown College, but I don't want to waste too much time talking about me because that is not why you're here. So let's dive right into it, and we'll start with the first A, or the 4 A's of leadership. So when you look at this model here, you have awareness, action, authenticity, and accountability. So awareness is the first piece, and as I mentioned, being a leader means looking inwards and understanding how it is that you lead, how you communicate, how you choose to interpret information, and then how you put that information back out to the people around you. So in order to become aware of this, we need to find our spark. And essentially, SPARK stands for security, praise, acknowledgement, respect, and knowledge. And when you look at each of these pillars, so SPARK as a whole are the 5 pillars of human desire that drive our motivation. They don't compound on one another. It's not like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you have to have security and then praise is the next step. These are all independent from one another, but all of them have the potential to impact your motivation in some way, whether it's positively or negatively. So I figured that the best way to really work through this and to explain this was to work through the security pillar together. So today you're going to learn a little bit about yourselves as leaders, as people. Perhaps you can take this and use it on your partner because it's applicable in all areas of your life, and you can most definitely use it with your teams, starting immediately. So we'll get into the security pillar here, and there are 3 components to security when you break it down. You have physical, financial, and emotional, as you can see. Seems pretty straightforward. When we look at physical, we have things like injury, so physical injuries, fatigue and burnout are both included in this, and they are huge because oftentimes we don't realize that we've reached that point until we're there. And these are very, very hard to reverse. So this is a big thing that you see, especially in finance, in kind of like the downtown metropolis, because the pace is go, 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 and people don't really have the opportunity to assess where they're at physically until their body just says, enough, you need to stop and slow down. And then with that, you have improper safety measures and equipment, obviously, that all tie into the physical aspect. Next, we have financial. So simple, paying bills. We work to live, or do we live to work? And there are other things in this financial component that we often don't think about. So people come to work to collect a paycheck. Yes, that is true. But the other things that we don't realize is that they may also be supporting other family members, near or far. They could be saving for something specific, a milestone, a wedding, a vacation, whatever that may be. Perhaps they've had some costs that have popped up unexpectedly. A car accident, a flood, all of these pieces that they might bring into the workplace with them that we are not aware of immediately. And with the financial piece, no advancement opportunities really plays on the security pillar, because if there aren't advancement opportunities, there's no room for their salary to expand. They've capped out. Why would they work much harder? Right? As human beings, we're always trying to evolve and to better ourselves. And if we can't do that to collect a higher salary, a lot of people will just kind of plateau in their motivation as well. And then you also have emotional. So we look at bullying in the workplace, a lack of recognition or acknowledgement, because as human beings, we like to be acknowledged, to be noticed, seen, and heard. Mental exhaustion, so that brain fog that we see, which is also congruent with fatigue and burnout. Sometimes verbal abuse, right? If our leaders, as leaders, are harsh and direct, sometimes we take that in the wrong way. And we can also be that way too, right? Stress has a funny way of morphing our personalities into something that we normally aren't. I like to call that the stress monster, and it creeps out quite often in a leadership role. And then lack of training and development, because if you aren't given the tools to succeed, you will feel worse about yourself. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. It's just, if you go into a workplace and you don't feel adequately equipped to do your job, how is that affecting you? It's probably going to demotivate you a little bit, because you don't know what your next step is. You don't know how to get those tools in order to learn and to do your job effectively. So when we notice that there are some things lacking within the security pillar, we have two options. We either go into fight or flight, which we all have heard of from basic biology. So under the fight category, we have bullying, gossiping, insufficient mentorship, intentional inclusion, and subconscious sabotage. And the last three there, I really want you to focus on, because the majority of the time, these things happen subconsciously. So when we think of the term insecurity, particularly pertaining to the workplace, it generally is because somebody is taking something from you. So I feel insecure because I'm worried somebody will take something from me. And when we go back to the three components of security here, somebody could be vying for a promotion and that person is taking money away from them. So that hits the financial component. Somebody could be taking their time and energy. So that hits the physical component. And somebody could be taking their recognition by excelling, by coming in as the new person and being an excellent team player. So they're taking that recognition or acknowledgement, and that hits the emotional component. Then we look at flight. And if fight isn't an option, most people just resort to flight. So they seek a new opportunity, something where they can learn and grow. They have development opportunities. They have more kindness in the workplace, more mentorship, and a positive work environment. And 7 out of 10 times, people will leave their jobs because of the management. Those are the facts. And it's unfortunate, but people will also take a pay cut to have, the majority of people, I should say, will take a pay cut in order to have sufficient mentorship to learn, grow, and better themselves, at least for a period of time until they feel like they can move on to something where they're more equipped for that role at a higher salary level. So in order to identify where something is lacking in this security pillar, it's easier for us to look inwards and say, okay, I know that this person is doing really well. Am I worried about them? Am I threatened by them? Why am I threatened by them? Are they taking away something from which component of my security pillar? But when we're looking at our teams and people are coming into work and, they just seem really demotivated, you have to start having those conversations to ask them the important questions. So first is identifying what's wrong with them. I'll give you a perfect example. This requires active listening, which is something that as leaders, we should all work on consistently. But in order to identify, if you think Susan comes into the office and you can tell that she's visibly distraught and she says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. I was just on the phone with the insurance company because I got in a car accident and I don't know if my insurance is going to honor it. And now I have to rent a car to take my son to soccer tonight. So automatically you've identified that she has extra financial burdens. She doesn't know whether her insurance is covering the cost of her car, which is now totaled. And she has to rent a car on top of that. Emotionally, she's exhausted because she has to deal with somebody. It's all that stress. And then she had to work through the logistics to get her son to his soccer game. So now you've identified that there are some things happening in that security pillar there. And then we acknowledge it and we say, hey, Susan, I understand that's a lot to deal with right now. That is a big morning. I'm so sorry to hear that. I have 10 minutes right now. Do you want to come chat? Or why don't I make you a tea? Why don't you go make a tea? Why don't you just go outside, take a few deep breaths, go for a walk? Because I will tell you, when people are so wound up and in that emotional state and they come in, and as leaders, we want people to be efficient. So you're late, we have so much work to do, sit down, get your work done. By giving these people, whoever it is that comes in visibly stressed or distraught, by giving them the space to either be heard or just to take a deep breath and ground themselves in the environment that they are now in, as opposed to what they're bringing into the workplace, they will be more productive because they'll be able to clear their heads, push that out of the way, at least for now, and sit down and focus. So that's the communication piece, is just talking it through. We don't always have 10 minutes to sit down with people, if I'm being honest. We know that we have our jobs to do as well, but this is how you start to build that rapport, start to build trust and loyalty with your team. And set a time limit on it. I only have 10 minutes, but I'm happy to hear you out, or you're welcome to come in and chat about it if you'd like, and then we can get on with the day. So I just want you to think for a second, how many of you have either heard or said, I would be lying if I said I haven't said any of these things, the following: what do they even do? They're useless. Do I have to do everything around here? They don't know how to do their job. They have no idea what we do every day. That is specifically in regards to management. And I just don't have the time to train someone new. These are all very common phrases that I hear, and clients that I work with now will reiterate that, my staff are always complaining about this and that. And these phrases come up time and time and again. This brings us to the idea of assumptions and perceptions, which are the killers of all team dynamics, in my eyes, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that. So when we think about assumptions, they come more from thin air, if you will. So by definition, an assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or is certain to happen without proof. Again, a little bit from thin air. Perception is more from external impressions or stimuli that are happening that we have actually perceived. So it's a way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something, which is then turns into a mental impression. So for example, an assumption would be something like, she owns the company and it's doing well. She must be rolling in money. What we don't see is that she, who owns the company, has just sold all of her expensive jewelry in order to pay your salary, right? We don't know what goes on in the back end. Sure, the company's making money. How much debt are they in? So as leaders, there are so many pressures that people don't see and will never see, because we know it's not necessarily appropriate to talk about those things, nor do we want to talk about those. So if you have a leader in your life who, perhaps you're making assumptions about, keep these in mind. If you are somebody that is having assumptions made about you, just remember that people don't see the full story. They don't know what's happening behind the scenes, right? And then with perception, it would be something like, the owner of the company owns a really nice car. She must be rolling in money. That's a little more concrete. How can you buy a nice car if you don't have the wealth? So again, we don't know where this money came from. We don't know whether it's the company doing well. Maybe it's somebody, it was a gift from her parents. Who knows, right? But again, this one is a little more rooted in fact than an assumption. And when we look at assumption in the workplace, there are two models that I always go by. The first is departmental, which is a horizontal model. So this would be something like sales and marketing, right? We have a big project to work on. You look at Jill in marketing, and we'll say Tim in sales. So Jill in marketing has to get her deliverables by tomorrow. Jill in marketing takes her hour-long lunch break. Tim in sales says, Jill is always slacking. She went out for lunch again today. But what Tim doesn't see is that Jill takes her laptop home and Jill works until midnight to get that deliverable done by tomorrow. Tim works through his lunch so that he can leave at 5 p.m. And these are just examples, but again, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in the majority of workplaces, and that's where we have these assumptions, which creates kind of an us versus them divide. And when we think about this in terms of a solution, we need to be crystal clear and transparent with job descriptions and expectations. And that is how you start to eliminate the us versus them mentality, because then people are able to hold one another accountable. The second model is managerial. So this is a vertical model, and it's a little tiered because you have frontline employees, and then you have the mid-level management, then you have mid-level to senior management, and then the biggest divide is frontline employees to senior management, right? So that's a big gap. And I'm going to bring that full circle for you, but first I'd love for everybody to get your pens out, and all you need to do is write A or B, but we're gonna do a little personality quiz. So the first question is, when I'm asked to complete a new task at work, I, A, ask for a step-by-step breakdown and follow the rules, or B, I try to do the task my own way. The second question is, I prefer a set 9 to 5 schedule and a routine, or B, a changing schedule. It gives me variety. And just a side note, this is one of those, the most correct answer. So whichever relates to you the most and more frequently. When cooking, this does apply to business, I typically follow a recipe closely or I wing it. Somebody told me the other day that they put cocoa powder in chili. Sounds weird. Apparently it was delicious. So are you that person? Are you a cocoa powder and chili person? My workspace is A, always the same, everything has its place, or B, organized chaos. Okay. If I have a list of tasks to complete, I A, complete one fully before I start another, or B, work on bits and pieces until each are finished. Six, I crave A, stability, or B, change. And 7, when I think about new projects or expansions in the workplace, it A, makes me feel anxious and worried, or B, gets me excited. Okay, so everybody should have written A's or B's, and I want you to tally up whether you have mostly A's or mostly B's. And so we're going to be talking about the builder and maintainer dynamic. And this is always revolutionary for people once they realize what it looks like in terms of the communication back and forth and the ways to really motivate one another. And so when we look at the personality partners, as I mentioned, in each pillar, you have a personality partner in each of the pillars of Spark. So they are the yin and the yang. They need each other in order to thrive, in order to create something beautiful, right? You need that balance. So one is not lesser than the other. They are necessary for each other. So builders and maintainers, if you had mainly A's, you are a maintainer. So you are 90% of the population, which is wonderful, and you're very detail oriented. You crave routine, you crave structure and framework. That doesn't mean that you can't have some autonomy within that, but it typically means that you like somebody to say, here's how we do it, and then you can figure it out from there. You can sometimes become paralyzed by too much change. You excel with day-to-day operations. So coming in, everything from, policy and procedure creation, creating manuals, whether it's just the flow, the operation of everything, you are the operations people. That's who you are. You may sometimes have a hard time seeing the big picture because you like to focus on smaller tasks in order to complete those. You prefer smaller tasks, solutions, and smaller pieces of change. You have a systematic approach to everything, which I commend you for. and you enjoy focusing and hitting smaller, like short-term goals, so monthly or quarterly goals instead of the annual or 5-year goals. So when we're speaking with maintainers, there are certain things and certain keywords that we want to try and sneak into our sentences that will really help to motivate them. So if we're asking them to do something, we want to use this language because it will immediately resonate with them. So we want to use words like maintain, support, things that will remain the same, a routine, saying something like, well, we're doing it the way we've always done it. That provides a sense of comfortability. And the normal way that we do X, Y, and Z, right? So when you're introducing change specifically, you really want to frame it in a way that says, everything is remaining the same. The only thing that's changing is this piece. Because when you say that, it immediately puts their mind at ease to say, 75% of my job is remaining the same. This 25 is changing, and I can handle that. So just make sure that when you're talking to a maintainer, you're using these words as best as you can. And then be mindful of the fact that they are very much 9 to 5. So maintainers, they work when they work, and then they like to go home, and they like that home lifestyle, which is amazing. But as a builder, you may also, sometimes we sit there and fire emails off at 11 o'clock p.m. And when you do that, a maintainer will see it and think, shoot, should I be working right now? Oh my gosh, and the anxiety starts to build and build. You don't need to do that. So respect their 9 to 5. And if you do send an email outside of the work hours, preface it in the subject line by saying, this isn't urgent. We can talk about it tomorrow. Or don't worry about reading this now, firing off some thoughts. If it is urgent, obviously note that, but that's a conversation that you have to have with your employees to say, I will let you know when I need a response immediately and when I don't. And then automatically everybody's on the same page and everybody kind of knows what's expected of them. You want to provide all of the details in the first communication. Because maintainers are very detail oriented, I always suggest going through the 5 W's, making sure you've hit all the points, because if they don't have all the details, they will come back and forth with questions. And if we're being honest, that's really not an efficient use of anybody's time. So making sure that you kind of go through a list of FAQs in your head, think about everything that they may ask, all of the questions, all of the finite pieces, and then send the email. It might take a little bit longer off the hop, but it'll save you a lot more time in the long run. Have it repeated back to you for confirmation. So when you're speaking to somebody, just make sure that they repeat it back so that everybody is on the same page and it's crystal clear what you're asking for. Introduce change in small increments, or as I mentioned, talk about what is remaining the same in addition to the few things that are changing. And make sure you speak slower with intention and directly to them, right? So when we see this builder-maintainer dynamic, builders are often, thinking about the next thing. They're here while they're also having a conversation. They're already down the hallway in their mind. So try to be present, speak slower to make sure that all of the details are portrayed, and then speak with intention as well. Know what you're saying to them. Make sure that you are giving them all of the details. If you had mostly Bs, you're a builder. So you focus more on the big picture, right? You're responsible for the business as a whole, creating new framework. And oftentimes you see the builders who have created something, they have a maintainer who then runs the day-to-day things. And say that maintainer is sick for a day. The builder steps into the office and they say, I don't remember how to do that. And then you'll kind of look at them and say, well, didn't you create this? Yeah, but I haven't looked at this in years. So that is the kind of dynamic that you see. The maintainer knows everything that's going on. The builder sets it and forgets it. So they also may skip over some of the details because builders see the end result in their mind. So they go from 1 to 10 and they forget about all the numbers in between. They're just hopping straight to 10. So when they're trying to explain something to you as well, you will likely just get the painted picture of the end result. So that's why it's important to ask for the details. They're quite resilient in times of change because they are often the ones implementing the change, but sometimes that can be mistaken for a lack of compassion. It seems like they're only focused on the business. And if we're being honest, builders, typically that is their role. It's to focus on the business so that everybody else can be paid. Because if there's no business, there is no paycheck for anybody else. So that's also something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that they're insensitive or that they don't care about their staff. Sometimes it's just that in order for them to pay you, they need to prioritize focusing on some of the business pieces. They often speak very quickly. If I'm speaking too quickly, I will apologize now. And they can sometimes seem to be distant, disinterested, or aloof. And before I continue, I just want to tell you a funny little story. I was presenting a budget for the next quarter to one of my bosses. He was the president of the company, and he was sitting at the head of the table. I was quite young, and I had prepared this. I'd worked so hard on it, and I was so excited. And the entire time he was sitting there, and his phone would go off, and he'd pick it up, and he'd text and put it back down. Then he'd pick up his phone again and text and put it back down. And I started to get really offended because I worked hard on this, and why are you wasting my time? So I just stopped and I looked at him, and I didn't say anything. And it took him a couple of moments to realize that nobody was speaking anymore. And he looked up at me, and I looked at him, and I said, do you want to reschedule this? Should we do this meeting another time? Or should I just email it to you? Because I don't need to stand here and talk if you're not going to listen. I'll tell you, while I was saying that, I was sweating buckets, but I thought, no, this is my time, and I've worked very hard to present this to you. And he looked at me and he said, I'm really sorry. I have a meeting next, and I was just thinking about that. And he put his phone away, and that was the last time that ever happened in our relationship, business relationship. So that's just a way to also kind of remind them, a gentle reminder that my time is valuable too. And I know you have a million things on the go, but just be present, be here now. We'll get this over with, and then you can go on about the rest of your day. So some keywords for builders, you want to use big picture words like build, grow, expand, undertake, or an endeavor. When you're explaining something and trying to get your point across, say, this is how I imagine it. When I look at the big picture or in the grand scheme of things, because automatically you're speaking their language, and that will resonate with them. So they'll start to envision what you're talking about. And then obviously you have to be descriptive without too much fluff. And just be mindful that the contrary to what I said with the maintainers, that 11 p.m. emails aren't necessarily meant to be replied to immediately. And if you find that you're getting that a lot, it's a simple conversation with this builder relationship that you have. Just say, hey, I don't look at my phone past 9 p.m. and I see that I get a lot of emails at 11. Am I meant to reply to those, or are those just you firing off your thoughts? Again, just open the channels of communication. They can't be mad about that. You're just asking a question. Ask for clarification in the details up front. Always follow up in writing. Builders, this personality type is notorious for having a conversation, and then 3 weeks later, you'll go to revisit that conversation and they'll say, I never said that. So this covers your behind, because you can say, well, I sent you a follow-up email just to make sure that we were on the same page. You said X, Y, and Z. Is this still the case, or do we need to have another conversation about that? So it saves you the stress and frustration of trying to replay a conversation that you had in your mind. And then everybody is just crystal clear and concise and can hold one another accountable. With a builder, you want to schedule a meeting. Don't ambush them. First of all, it won't be productive. You will not get them at their full attention, and you won't get what you want. So schedule a meeting and set a time limit. I have some time. I was hoping I could meet with you Wednesday at 11 a.m. for 20 minutes. That's all it'll take. And stick to that 20 minutes. At 20 minutes, say, we have a couple more things to cover. Is it okay if we go an extra 10 minutes, or would you like me to plan a follow-up meeting? Oftentimes, they're not going to want to plan a follow-up meeting. So just give them that option and be respectful of their time. And keep your points short and concise for best results, right? The attention span, because they have so much going on, they're the million tabs open in their mind kind of people. So just make sure that your points are concise, and then you move on to the next one to keep and hold interest. So when we think about builders and maintainers and the personality partners just as a whole, it's really all about perspective. And this is something as a leader that is so incredibly important, because you are setting the tone for your entire team, for your company, for yourself. So just make sure that you're thinking about what perspective means to you and whether you feel like you have a good grasp on perspective, right? Because a lot of time we go in and we see things the way we see them. We speak to people the way that we want to be spoken to. And that's not always the case that garners the best results. So also, when you think about your leadership journey personally, I want you to think about the responsibilities that you had when you were at an entry level and the responsibilities that you have now. And then I want you to think about, we can use the state of the world, for example. What did you have to do 3 months ago? And what has changed in your job responsibility to this day, but now has kind of normalized, right? That's in 3 short months that now this new way of conducting business seems relatively normal. So imagine what 3 years of a leadership journey does. We adapt and we evolve so much quicker than we think. And that's a great thing, but it can also be a detriment to us as leaders, because sometimes it's hard to look back and say, oh, I remember being in that situation and I remember it was a struggle, or I remember the difficulties that came along with this role, because you keep evolving and you keep moving and you're met with new difficulties. So reflecting back will always help you to relate to your staff. And when you hear your staff, I'm sure many of us have been on the receiving end or have said this ourselves, I don't even know what they do. Management's always just going for lunch, or they're doing this or they're doing that. Our realities are different. And if you have not yet been in that leadership role, that level of management, you don't know what that reality looks like. And so remembering that our staff doesn't necessarily know what our reality is. So maybe there's bitterness, maybe there's resentment, but they don't understand, or they haven't yet had to experience the pressures that you have at that level. So again, we're just tying in a little bit of empathy and compassion, understanding, some tolerance as well. And these are what make exceptional leaders. And then we just switch up the conversation a little bit. So I want to just take us back to those questions that I asked. Maybe you raised your hand at home or mentally raised your hand about the things that we hear staff say, or that we hear in the workplace all the time. And a lot of the time as leaders, we don't want to get involved. We don't want to open up Pandora's box and have that conversation. So we just let it go. It kind of falls on deaf ears because people are just venting or they're just complaining. But what we really can do is make it a more constructive and positive conversation. And we can get them to start thinking critically. So in that regard, we're also building leaders, which is phenomenal. So for example, what do they even do? You want to make sure that you're providing your team with a clear list of responsibilities and up-to-date job descriptions, because then you have transparency. And as I mentioned earlier, it acts as a two-way contract. So you have accountability all around. They're useless. One of my personal favorites. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but what is it that they're not able to do? What training could we offer them to help them improve? If you get crickets, then that means we need to work on our critical thinking skills with our team. But that puts it back on them to come to you with a solution. And that is what we want with our team, right? We want people to be able to think on their own so that they're not constantly running to you with problems. They're coming to you with solutions, and then the implementation happens very quickly after that. Do I have to do everything around here? We really want to provide you with as much support as possible. And obviously you can put these in your own terms. It doesn't have to be as staunch as I'm saying it. What additional tasks are you taking on right now? Let's see how we can distribute the work better. When you have this conversation, it's also incredibly helpful to have the job description along with the expectations so that you can compare them, right? If you have a job description and a list of expectations that's perhaps, I don't know, for example's sake, 10 bullet points, and they give you a list of 30 things that they're now doing because they're taking on work from other people, well, now you have concrete evidence that perhaps they're not motivated or they're just exhausted because they're overwhelmed from their workload. So being able to compare those side by side is incredibly valuable. They don't know how to do their job. Let's help change that. What have you identified as their areas of improvement? Again, putting it back on them, getting them thinking critically. They have no idea what we do every day. And this you hear a lot going directed up at management, right? They don't know what it's like down here. They have no idea what we do every day. And as a manager, as a business owner, whoever it is that, hears this statement, you can say, what are the 3 things that you would like them, that you would like me to know about your day-to-day so that I can better understand what it is that you do. They can better understand what it is that you do. just being able to then say, I will take this information and learn a little bit about you builds, again, that rapport and that degree of trust and loyalty. And I don't have the time to train someone new. This one, I'm sure you all know a great way to fix that, but you want to be very specific when you're having this conversation. So I understand that right now you're very busy because of insert an exact reason. You're very busy means like, yeah, I get it, you're busy, right? But if you're specific and you say, I know you're very busy because of the proposal that's going out on Friday, then it shows your employee that you actually pay attention to what they're doing and you know what it is that they're working on. If you can't think of a specific example, then I think you need to actually find out what it is your employees are working on, right? So that's a test for everybody. And then you follow up with, think of this as an investment to free up some of your time. The sooner that insert name here is trained properly, the more they'll be able to take off your plate and free up your time to focus on your normal, your usual, your regular responsibilities. Again, we're tying in that keyword there because as a maintainer, they'll say, oh, right, that's how I get back to normal. So that's how you would kind of combine all of this into a sentence. So if we look back to the 4 A's of leadership, we've gone through awareness, so we've become aware, and then we have our action pieces, which is implementing it, having those conversations, and then we look at authenticity, right? And this one is a bit harder to track, but it's easy to implement because you can tell when you're being authentic and when you're being inauthentic, and other people can tell, which is the biggest piece of that. So you want to make sure you're being genuine. If you are, talking to somebody, if you have to give praise and you don't feel like it's genuine, don't do it because it's not going to come off the way that it should. Check your tone. When we're speaking from a place of stress, oftentimes it doesn't come off the way that we want it to. So if somebody is frustrating you, if they're stressing you out, this is something that I really had to overcome in my journey through kind of the workplace and through management, was that I would get so frustrated and I would go to just fire off an email. And so I started to, when I felt those emotions come up, the feelings of stress and frustration, I would physically lift my hands off my keyboard and I would take a deep breath. And then I'd say, is what I'm about to write going to be productive? How will it be received by the person on the other end? And what do I think they will think and send back to me? Because if we are not able to have a productive conversation from what I'm about to send them, I'm not going to send that email because there's no point. It just perpetuates the problem. So check your tone. And you can do this when you're having a face-to-face conversation as well. Imagine lifting your hands. If you're about to say something, lift your hands or bite your tongue or something. Count to 5, take a deep breath, and then have the conversation and say what you're about to say. But don't open your mouth and let the first thing that comes out of your mouth actually come out of your mouth, because I guarantee you'll reflect on that later and you will regret it. Speak to the person that you're talking to, not at them. So when you are asking employees for something or you're asking a colleague for something, ask them. Give them the opportunity to have a dialogue with you. They're going to do it. They have to do it. They report to you. But saying, hey, would you mind getting this to me by the end of the day? Would that be okay? They have the opportunity to say yes, or they have the opportunity to say, I have so much on my plate right now. I don't know if today is realistic. You're setting expectations across the board, and then you can have a conversation from there about prioritizing work or whatever the next step might be. When you come at them and say, I need this done by the end of the day, how do you think they're going to respond? Probably not well. Probably won't care if they get it to you by the end of the day. And if they do, it's probably not going to be their best work. So open that dialogue. Let them feel like they're taking ownership and agreeing to what you're asking them to do. People will do a lot more if they agree to what you're saying. Smiles go a long way. This sounds incredibly silly, but there are some days where, I don't feel like hopping on a Zoom call and I don't feel like having a client call. And I take my pen, and I know this sounds very strange, but you can try it right now unless you're in a public place, and don't pick up a pen because we can't be touching random things these days. But pick up your pen and put it in between your teeth like this. Okay? I look stupid, right? I look stupid. And so I look at myself in the mirror, and then my mouth is already in the shape of a smile, and I start to laugh. And doing this in a room full of people, honestly, the laughs that come out of that are incredible, but it starts to get your brain in the way of feeling happy, right? Because you're already creating a smile, then you start laughing at yourself because you're like, I just stuck a pen in my mouth to feel better. This is ridiculous. And then you get yourself in a better mood. And so this, you can also relate back to the being genuine piece. If you don't feel like you're going to do something genuine or say something genuine, stick a pen in your mouth and see what happens. If you feel better, carry on with what you're about to say. If you still don't, then let it lie. Practice active listening. I've mentioned that a couple times throughout today, and I can't stress enough how important that is. And be mindful of your energy. So our nonverbal language speaks so much louder than our words do, and we carry everything that we have at home into the workplace, just in our energy, right? You come in, you're having a bad day, you don't even have to say anything, and people will be like, whoa, she's off, what's up with her? So try and take a couple of deep breaths before you come in. Of course, it's inevitable. You can't come in and be Mary Poppins all the time, but just try and be mindful of that. That's really the first step to watching your energy and the way that you're coming in and what you're bringing into the workplace with you. And also your nonverbal language. So eye contact, your posture, right? If you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and you're slouched over like this, or you've turned your body and you're talking to them this way, it's not coming off as genuine. It's not coming off as confident. You just want to make sure that you're doing things that make people feel comfortable and that your body language and your eye contact are matching your message, because that is how we deliver the most authentic message possible. And then we have the fourth A, which is accountability. So I want you to just start observing. Take these pieces and reflect on who you are as a leader, on yourself, but also, I mean, it's Sunday, so I can imagine most of you aren't at work, but just think about your partner. If you have a partner there, when you think about your parents, think about your friends. What are things that they say? What are the keywords that you hear that can help you to identify whether they're a builder or maintainer? Because this relationship exists outside of the workplace as well. And if you, just for context, if you have a personal relationship, one person is a builder and the other person is a maintainer, this person is always saying, let's do this. Let's, here's a risk, but we can do it. We can take it. And the maintainer is saying, but what about X, Y, and Z? And they say, well, why are you always, just shutting down my ideas? And they'll say, why is your head always in the clouds? Like, why can't you think logically about these things? Once you're able to identify that in one another, then you can come together and create an awesome team, because one person will be dreaming, and then you can have a productive conversation about it and say, here's my goal, here's my dream. What do I need? What am I missing? Instead of, why are you always bringing down my ideas? So write out the facts as well. Who are you talking to? If you're going into a very important conversation, I always write down everything I know about the person. I know that Bill is in accounting. I know that he deals with numbers. He likes numbers. He's analytical. I know that I only have about 15 minutes with him. So while I'm trying to push human resource matter, I'm trying to talk about employee morale, I'm going to talk to him about the numbers and how if we don't execute what I'm trying to tell him, we will have to spend X amount in employee loss and turnover. So now you're speaking Bill's language, and Bill will be more inclined to implement your suggestions. Get to know your team in new ways each day. So again, this just comes from authentic conversation. Hey, Susie, does your son have soccer tonight? What team does he play on? Simple questions, but just let people know that you hear them and you see them and that you're there for them. And again, think before you speak. So who are you speaking to? This ties back into getting to know your team and writing out the facts about them. So I wanted to thank you all so much for showing up today. I know that it's, well, kind of early, it's mid-afternoon, but not only for your teams, but more so for yourself. And I hope that you got something out of this and it made sense, it resonated. I'll stop sharing my screen and maybe you have some questions like Mia over here. So feel free to put them in the chat if you do. Just something to note, this is being recorded and will likely be used elsewhere. So if you do have questions and you don't feel like having your voice on video, then you're welcome to put them in the chat. You can also unmute yourself, whatever you'd like to do. If you have any questions, comments, if you want to share stories. Anybody?
Hi, Kendra.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Yeah. That was really good. Thank you for sharing that. It was really good. I mean, I'm not a leader. I've led some people in a team, like corporate environment, but not, not a big team. But I just wanted to share one thing. I mean, I work in HR. I've worked in HR, and, training and communication with your team and trying to build a better dynamic with team is obviously like a big focus for us. And I just wanted to share that I remember I had this one leader that, when we did our monthly check-ins or mid-year check-in, he would often show me what kind of leadership training he was doing, and kind of ask my feedback on, how I thought he was doing, if there was something he could do better. So I think that, like, obviously this is so great for leaders, but it's also so great to just share with your entire team so they kind of understand, what you're learning, and and then they can get feedback, right? So, and just I think that just kind of really creates, the trust and a better rapport, and kind of gives the employees, the opportunity to feel more open with their leaders. They don't feel as intimidated. So anyways, I just wanted to share that because I thought it was relevant to this, and yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kendra.
Thank you. And that's a great point. I mean, what a phenomenal leader to be able to feel that comfortable and confident to have those conversations with you. And that's exactly what you want, right? You want that transparency, you want that open dialogue, because ideally a rising tide lifts all boats, and one day your team will become a leader and that pushes you up as well. So you want to make sure that everybody is really benefiting from what you're learning. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Lise. Sarah, love the builder maintainer discussion. I'm a builder. Ooh, awesome. I thought you would be. That makes perfect sense. I'm glad you like that.
Thanks so much, Kendra. That was awesome. I echo all of Lisa's comments about your presentation. So much to take in, but I did have one question around communicating with maintainers. Do you have any tips for doing that now in terms of all the change that's going on in the world, where leaders may not have a ton of certainty to give to people who really thrive when they do have that certainty around tasks and upcoming changes?
Yeah, that is a great question, actually. So what I would recommend is still listing the things that you do know for certain, and acknowledging the fact that you might not know everything, but that you will provide them, as soon as you know, you will provide them the information. Because you also have to look at it from a human perspective, right? That we're all going through this together, expressing that and saying, I'm trying to learn as quickly as I can so that I can see what we need to change and give you lots of lead time so that it's not going to be as stressful as perhaps at the beginning of this, or just trying to ease their mind and let them know that you're working on it, and you're trying to get the information as quickly as you can. But it is tricky because nobody really knows what's going on. So just letting them know the few things that you are certain of, always expressing that, and then saying, I'm not certain about what this looks like for three months down the road, but what I can tell you is that we are going to do everything to get us as close to normal as possible. Or what we hypothesize might happen would be X, Y, and Z. But if anybody has any ideas or solutions, I'd love to have that conversation with you. So you can also make them a part of having that conversation and saying, what is everybody comfortable with? Or what would you like to see if it is possible down the road? What would you like to keep? What worked well in the past and what didn't work well? What would you be open to seeing change? So then you're also giving them the opportunity to say, we liked this, and if we're able to go back to that, this system, this procedure, whatever it is, worked really well, but this didn't. So they're kind of telling you what they're comfortable with in terms of change, and then you can try and implement that as best as possible, and they feel like they're contributing to the solution as well. Does that answer your question and make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much.
Great question. Any other questions?